Welcome back to the Deep Dive, listeners. Today we're taking a look at something you, the learner, picked out for us, something you thought would be super interesting.
Yeah, we're going to be diving into Reality is Plastic, The Art of Impromptu Hypnosis by Anthony Jacquin.
Okay, so right off the bat, just from the title, this sounds fascinating. We're not talking about like stage hypnosis, are we?
No, not at all. This is a completely different beast. We're not talking about the swinging pocket watch or anything like that.
It's not even like, hypnotherapy for quitting smoking or losing weight.
Nope, different. This is about, well, as the title says, impromptu hypnosis.
So like doing it anywhere, anytime kind of thing.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And we're going to really try and help you understand how it works, the main techniques, the principles behind it. And I think you're going to get some amazing insights into the power of suggestion, how our minds work. It's pretty cool stuff.
Sounds like it. So let's jump right in. What is impromptu hypnosis? How is it different from all the other types of hypnosis we hear about?
Well, it's basically the ability to hypnotize people on the fly, like anytime, any place, whether it's one person or even a small group.
Okay.
But Jacquin, the author, he makes it very clear what it's not. It's not stage hypnosis, it's not hypnotherapy, and it's definitely not self-hypnosis.
Right. Okay.
And it's not those, like accelerated learning techniques you hear about. And it's not about like covert seduction or persuasive sales tactics or anything like that.
Got it.
And no magic involved.
Okay. Good to know. So no mind control or anything like that?
No, not at all. We'll get into that.
Okay. Fair enough. So if it's not all those things, what is it actually used for?
Well, Jacquin suggests it can be used for, well, for fun, for creating laughter.
Okay. I can see that.
It can also be used for giving rapid relief from pain or discomfort, really, both physical and emotional.
Interesting.
He also mentions using it for what he calls social engineering, which sounds a little,
Yeah, a little ominous.
Yeah, but when he talks about it, it's not about manipulating people in a bad way,
Yeah.
It's more about the potential to influence how people think and act in social settings.
I see.
He just stressed, how you use these skills is really up to you. That's an important point.
Definitely. Ethical considerations are always important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The key takeaway here is that it's all about simple, direct techniques that you can learn and apply in real-world settings.
Makes sense. So like if you're at a party and someone's like, hey, you know about hypnosis, right? Can you hypnotize me?
Precisely. That's the kind of scenario this book is all about. It equips you to handle those situations.
Yeah.
And maybe even introduce the idea yourself when it's appropriate.
Interesting. So it's not just about responding to requests. It's about maybe initiating it yourself in the right context.
Right. But let's talk about something the book says early on that I found really interesting.
Okay. What's that?
The first chapter is titled, Hypnosis, No Introduction Necessary.
No introduction necessary. That's kind of strange. I mean, don't you need to explain what hypnosis is before you do it?
Well, here's the thing. Jacquin says that pretty much everyone, even young kids, already has some idea of what hypnosis is, even if they've never experienced it.
Okay, I guess I can see that. We see it in movies and stuff.
Exactly. They get it from, like you said, movies, TV shows, what they've heard. So even if someone's skeptical, they still have this pre-existing framework for what they think it is.
So you're saying as someone learning about impromptu hypnosis, I need to keep that in mind. Be aware of what the other person might already believe about it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Jacquin stresses how important it is to understand those pre-existing beliefs. And you can even work within those beliefs, as long as they're not, based on fear or anything like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to play into someone's anxieties.
Exactly. If they have concerns, you address them directly, like fear of the unknown, fear of revealing secrets. Put them at ease.
Build trust.
Yeah. But, when it comes to hypnosis, there's this historical figure that's kind of fascinating.
Oh, who's that?
Franz Mesmer. He was a big deal back in the 18th century.
Yeah.
He came up with this idea of animal magnetism.
Animal magnetism. What's that?
It was this idea that there's a kind of vital force flowing through all living things. And he believed that illness was caused by blockages in this flow.
Okay, so energy flow or something.
Exactly. And he thought he could channel this magnetism to heal people. And his methods were, pretty interesting.
Like what?
He used things like magnets, physical contact,
Yeah.
and some of his patients had these really strong reactions, which he saw as part of the healing process.
Wow, so that's where the word mesmerize comes from.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting, but that doesn't sound much like modern hypnosis.
Right. And that brings us to a key point.
Mm.
The definition of hypnosis has evolved over time.
So how did people view it back then?
Back then, it was often seen as this specific altered state of consciousness,
Hmm.
almost like, a form of sleep.
But nowadays, it's more about this idea of hyper-focused attention. When you're hypnotized, your attention is narrowed and fixed on specific ideas, and your actions can feel automatic. And you tend to, filter out other stuff going on around you.
So less about being asleep and more about laser focus.
Exactly.
The book also mentions the Human-Givens model of hypnosis. What's that all about?
The Human-Givens approach is interesting. It suggests that our brains have these inherent needs, and hypnosis kind of taps into the brain's natural ability to, generate our experience of reality, kind of like it does when we dream.
Okay.
So it's less about it being a distinct state and more about activating natural brain processes. But Jacquin points out, even this model suggests that, something special happens in the brain during hypnosis, which is still being debated in the field.
So there's not really a complete consensus on exactly what's happening in the brain during hypnosis.
Not yet. It's still a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, it doesn't really matter whether it's a specific state or just a different way of using our natural abilities. The point is, it works.
Fair enough. So we've talked about what impromptu hypnosis is, and we've touched on the historical context. But what about the person doing the hypnotizing? The book has a section called Being the Hypnotist and the Approach. That sounds pretty important.
Oh, it is. It's absolutely crucial. Jacquin makes this really insightful point that your attitude, your persona, your confidence, those things matter way more than any script or technique.
Really? More than the words you use?
Yes. It's about developing your own style of communication, something that feels natural to you and connects with the other person.
So authenticity is key.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He says you need to become like a heightened version of yourself, your larger self, he calls it, or your best self, projecting confidence and clarity.
Like amplifying your natural charisma.
Exactly. And your body language is super important too, how you occupy space, how you move.
Interesting. So it's not just about what you say, it's about how you say it, how you present yourself.
Absolutely. Confidence is contagious. If you believe in yourself, the other person's more likely to believe in you too.
Makes sense. So you've got the right mindset. You're exuding confidence. What's next? How do you actually start? The book talks about the setup.
The setup is crucial. Jacquin says there are 5 key things you need to do. 1, you need to remove any fear the person might have. 2, eliminate any misconceptions they have about hypnosis. 3, increase their expectancy that something's going to happen.
Okay, build the anticipation.
Yeah. 4, you need to fire up their imagination. And 5, you need to take control of the interaction.
All right, so that sounds like a lot to accomplish, especially if you're doing this spontaneously.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a whirlwind. Sometimes you have to move quickly. Jacquin talks about going straight into an induction to prevent the fear from building up.
So sometimes there's no time for a long setup.
Right. If you see a window, you have to go for it.
But what if you're not doing a rapid induction?
Well, then you need a good elevator pitch. Something short and sweet that gets the point across.
So like a quick summary of what they can expect.
Exactly. You need to communicate quickly and clearly that you can hypnotize, they can be hypnotized, and there's no need to worry.
And taking control doesn't mean being like bossy or demanding, right?
No, not at all. It's about being authoritative, giving clear instructions, even simple things like asking them to adjust their posture.
I see. Subtle ways to establish yourself as the guide.
Right. It also gives you a sense of how receptive they are to following directions, which is useful information.
Makes sense. And what about those fears we talked about earlier? How do you handle those during the setup?
That's super important. Fear of the unknown, fear of revealing secrets, fear of not being able to snap out of it. These are common concerns.
Yeah, those are understandable fears.
You need to reassure them. Explain that it's a pleasant experience, it's not sleep, they're in control, they won't reveal anything they don't want to, and that whole getting stuck thing is a myth.
Good to know. So basically you're educating them, dispelling those myths.
Exactly. There's an example of a pre-talk script in the book by Amit Badiani that really focuses on building that rapport, highlighting the safety, emphasizing following instructions.
So it's all about creating a safe, comfortable environment.
Exactly. But, it's important to remember that the person doing the hypnotizing needs to address their own fears and misconceptions too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You can't project confidence if you're not feeling it yourself.
Precisely. Okay, so let's say you've done the setup. You're ready to start. How can you tell if someone is actually being hypnotized? It's not always super obvious, is it?
Yeah, good point. What are the signs?
Well, Jacquin says the most straightforward way is to give a suggestion and see if they follow it.
So just test it out.
Yeah. You're looking for that instant, complete response. And it should feel automatic to them, at least to some degree.
So it's not just about them doing what you say, it's about how they experience it internally.
Right. Now, there are also some physical signs you can look for. But not everyone will show all of them.
Like what?
You might see their eyelids flickering or fluttering, rapid eye movement, kind of like when they're dreaming,
Okay.
changes in their skin temperature or color. Their eyes might roll up a little.
Interesting.
Their breathing might become deeper and more steady. Their eyes might get a little watery or glazed over.
Wow.
And sometimes people report feeling like their head is heavy.
So those are things to watch out for.
Yeah, they're good indicators.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also use them to, enhance the experience.
How so?
Well, you can tailor your suggestions to encourage those signs. Like, you might focus their attention on their breath or suggest a slight head movement.
Okay.
And you can link those signs to other hypnotic phenomena. Like, if their eyelids are fluttering, you could suggest that as the fluttering increases, their hand will start to feel lighter and lighter and begin to lift.
So you're using their physical responses as a springboard for deeper suggestions.
Exactly. It's about noticing those subtle cues and using language to amplify them.
Cool. So we've talked about how to recognize the signs of hypnosis. But what about the things that can actually happen during hypnosis? What kind of experiences are we talking about? The book has a section called Hypnotic Phenomena, Beyond Relaxation. What does that mean?
Right. It's not just about feeling relaxed. There are all sorts of crazy things that can happen.
Like what?
Well, there's catalepsy, which is this temporary rigidity of the limbs, like their arms staying frozen in the air after you lift it.
Oh, wow.
And there's dissociation, which is a feeling of detachment from your body or surroundings.
Okay.
There's hypermnesia, which is supposedly enhanced memory recall. Regression, where someone might revert to childlike behaviors.
Interesting.
Revivification, which is like vividly reliving past events. And there are things like analgesia, which is reduced pain. And anesthesia, which is a complete lack of sensation.
Wow, so you can actually manipulate someone's senses with hypnosis.
It's possible. And then there's time distortion, where people's perception of time can be altered.
That's wild. So many different possibilities. Catalepsy is highlighted as a particularly important one. What's so special about catalepsy?
Jacquin really emphasizes catalepsy. He says it's a pretty powerful demonstration, and it was documented pretty early on, actually.
So like back in the Mesmer days?
Yeah, even earlier. It's this temporary rigidity, like we said, where the limb stays in whatever position you put it in. And sometimes the person feels like they've completely lost awareness of the limb, like they've forgotten it's even there.
That's kind of creepy.
It can be a bit freaky, yeah.
Yeah.
There's also this thing called waxy flexibility, where you can gently move the limb into a new position, and it'll just stay there. And it feels totally different from, consciously moving your arm. It can feel involuntary, like something else is controlling it.
Okay, so why is catalepsy so important in impromptu hypnosis?
Well, for one thing, it's a very convincing demonstration. Like, the person can actually see that something's happening.
Right, it's not just a feeling, it's a physical thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can lead to other hypnotic phenomena. You can even use it for ideomotor communication, which is basically getting responses through subtle movements without them having to speak.
So like nonverbal communication?
Exactly.
Right.
And even something simple like a hand resting on a table can become cataleptic. So it's pretty versatile.
Wow. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about what impromptu hypnosis is. We've talked about the hypnotist's approach, the setup, the signs of hypnosis, and even some of the crazy things that can happen during hypnosis. But how do you actually get started?
Well, after the setup, Jacquin talks about the set piece, your first rung.
Set piece, what's that?
It's basically a series of simple exercises that you do after the setup and before or even during the induction.
Okay.
A lot of people call them suggestibility tests or waking hypnosis, but Jacquin says those terms aren't really accurate.
So what are they really about?
Well, they serve several purposes. First, they help to establish what he calls the hypnotic deal. It's about getting the person involved, actively participating.
So they're not just passive observers.
Right. And they can be fun, they can be entertaining, and they show the person what's possible. They demonstrate the power of suggestion.
I see.
And importantly, they give you information about how responsive the person is. Do they follow suggestions easily? Do they resist?
Just a way to assess their suggestibility.
Exactly. And they build confidence.
Yeah.
Both in your ability to guide them and in their ability to experience hypnosis.
Makes sense.
They also help to fire up their imagination, focus their attention, and build anticipation for what's coming next.
Okay.
And sometimes a really well-done set piece can even be the induction itself.
Really? You can go straight into hypnosis from one of these exercises.
It's possible, yeah. It depends on the person and the situation. But the point is, these set pieces are not just a warm-up, they're an integral part of the process.
Interesting. So what are some examples of these set pieces?
Well, one of the most classic ones is called magnetic fingers.
Magnetic fingers. How does that work?
So you have the person clasp their hands together pretty tightly with their index fingers sticking out about an inch apart. And then you suggest that their fingers will start to move together, like they're being pulled by magnets. And when they touch, they can close their eyes and relax.
Okay.
And this one has a really high success rate. Like 99% of people will experience it.
Wow, really? Why do you think it works so well?
Well, I think it's the combination of focus and suggestion. You're directing their attention to that small space between their fingers, and you're giving them this very specific suggestion.
And they're already like subconsciously moving their fingers a little bit, right? So you're just amplifying those movements.
Exactly.
Clever. So what's another set piece?
Another popular one is called magnetic hands.
Okay, similar idea.
Yeah, kind of. This time, they have their hands out in front of them, palms facing each other. And you suggest that they imagine powerful magnets in their palms, pulling their hands together.
And do they close their eyes for this one?
Yeah, usually. It helps to block out distractions and increase the internal focus.
Makes sense.
And the suggestion is that as their hands touch, their head will fall forward and they'll drift into relaxation.
So this one relies more on imagination than physical sensation.
Right. Their arms might get a little tired, but the main driver is their response to your suggestion. And because their eyes are closed, you have a better chance of seeing those other hypnotic signs.
Like the eye fluttering and stuff.
Exactly. And like with magnetic fingers, the moment their hands touch can be used to deepen the hypnotic state.
Cool. So last one for today. What about the stiff arm?
Ah, the stiff arm. This one's a classic, too. There are actually two ways to do it.
Okay, what's the first way?
The first way is usually done with their eyes open. You ask permission to touch their arm, then you straighten it out and have them make a tight fist, tensing all the muscles.
Okay.
And then you tell them that their arm is becoming rigid like a steel bar. They won't be able to bend it, no matter how hard they try.
And do they actually try to bend it?
Yeah, they usually do. And of course, they can't.
So it's like a test of strength.
Kinda,
Right.
but it's more about the power of suggestion. Because they're already tensing their muscles, they're creating that resistance themselves. And then your suggestion amplifies it.
Right.
And afterwards, you can just touch their arm and tell them the stiffness is gone, and they can bend it again.
Interesting. What about the second way to do it?
The second way is with their eyes closed. They start with their hands in their lap, and you count to 3. On 1, they make a fist. On 2, they raise their arms straight out. On 3, they clench their fists tight.
Okay.
And then you give the same suggestions about the arm becoming stiff and unbendable.
And it works even though they're not consciously tensing their muscles this time.
Yeah. It's because they're still following your instructions, they're still engaging their imagination, and the suggestion itself can create that physical sensation.
It's like their mind is overriding their body's natural abilities.
Exactly. It's a really powerful demonstration of the mind-body connection.
Well, these set pieces sound like a fantastic way to start exploring impromptu hypnosis. They're simple, they're engaging, and they really highlight the power of suggestion.
Absolutely. They're the perfect first step, and it can lead to all sorts of amazing experiences.
So, listeners, we've taken a deep dive into the fascinating world of impromptu hypnosis, exploring its definition, history, key principles, and even some practical techniques. You, the learner, now have a solid foundation to start experimenting with these concepts yourself.
Remember, it's not about mind control or manipulation. It's about understanding how suggestion works, how our minds create our realities, and perhaps even bending those realities a little bit.
So as you go about your day, pay attention to the subtle ways suggestion might be influencing your own thoughts and actions. And consider this. What other aspects of reality, things we take for granted as fixed and unchangeable, might be more malleable than we think? That's something to ponder.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
And remember, reality is plastic.